Hello my friends, welcome back to Refit and Sail. My name's George, this is the Solent Boat Butler. I refit and repair boats for a living, but for once on this channel I'm getting to play with a boat that's actually mine. This is my SJ320 that I bought, and she was in a pretty tired state, and I'm going through a bit of a refit on her at the moment so I can get her in the water and go racing next season. In this episode we're going to be looking at some cracks in the hull and also glassing up an old hole in the hull. So stay tuned for some refit and repair works on my own SJ320. When I bought my SJ, it had been in the water for a considerable number of years. I think 3, possibly 4 years, pretty much untouched, just growing weed on the bottom. So when it was lifted to get it surveyed and get it moved, it had a huge amount of growth on the bottom of it. In fact, they used some garden tools to scrape the crustaceans off the bottom before they could pressure wash it. Now, as you can imagine, it had quite a grotty bottom even after pressure washing, so there were many layers of old anti-fouling paint, so I wanted to remove all of that because Raceboat and have a nice smooth bottom. The other reason for removing all the anti-fouling is I wanted to see what the surface of the hull was like under all that paint. Now, under the paint there was an old epoxy barrier coat, which I have also then sanded off completely right back to the original gel coat. So I wanted to check, once I've got all those coatings off, for any cracks, for any damage and bits and pieces, particularly around the keel, but also just generally around the rudder post and other areas of the hull, because these are fairly lightly built boats. It is a cruiser racer, but very much more performance oriented. So it only weighs just under 3.5 tons, I think, all up for a 10-meter boat, which is reasonably light. It's not stupidly light, but it's reasonably light, and you know, that weight has to come from somewhere. A lot of that weight is in the keel, and so it isn't necessarily in the hull laminate. However, it's a nicely built boat, it's a nicely designed boat, it is relatively problem free. They are known to be really strongly built boats, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, and like any boat, there are always a few little things that you can look at and may be able to improve once it's been out sailing. You can see where things are a bit more flexible than perhaps you would like. So let's go down below and I'll show you what I found. I'm under the front of the boat now, as you can see, and as is the case with lots of modern boats, it has a fairly flat area here, which causes slamming when you're beating up wind and there's any sort of decent size waves, and that is really common in modern boats, and there has to be enough structure in the boat to withstand that slamming and make sure there isn't too much flexing. Unfortunately, there is some evidence of some flexing here, and I'll give you a close-up in a minute, but just in this area here you can see some tiny little cracks in the gel coat where the hull has been pushed in and out in between a couple of bulkheads that are inside. So there's a bulkhead just about here, there we go, just about there, and there's a bulkhead just about there which run across the boat, but in between those bulkheads, right there, on exactly the same place on the other side, there has been some flexing. So that is something that I want to resolve. Now, this is hull number 3, so this is one of the very early SJ320s, and this is the only damage I can find, which I think is a testament to the decent design from Stephen Jones. But like any boat, there's always going to be a little Achilles heel, and there's a little bit of learning kind of once you've got a boat in the water and you can test it. They even do that with the IMOCA 60s, the Open 60 racing boats. You can do as much computer modelling as you like, but ultimately you cannot always exactly model the sea conditions that a boat is going to be in, and they'll design a new boat, they'll take it out sailing, and they'll freely admit they'll take it out sailing to see what breaks so they can fix it and refine the design. And you could say that's what's happening here. I'm not comparing this to an IMOCA, by the way. I mean, this is obviously the fastest boat in the world, but maybe not quite as fast as a foiling IMOCA. I've got to do something here to stop this from flexing, because it's only going to get worse. I've tapped all around this. There's no delamination of the actual hull laminate. These cracks are purely in the gel coat. So I think what I'm going to do is make an extra little stringer inside that goes down one side and up the other, glass over that, and that should just stop it from flexing by just providing a little bit more structure. But we'll go inside and find that in a minute. Before we do, you may notice possibly There is a depth transducer there, and there is a speed transducer there with a blanking plug in it. The new instruments that are going into this boat only need one through hull, so I've got a combined speed and depth transducer from Airmar going into one of these hulls. So I'm going to take both of these out, decide which one I'm going to use for the new transducer, and glass up the other hull, because it just doesn't need to be there. I could just put a blanking plug in it, but that's still going to leave a lump on the outside, and to be honest with you, if I don't need a hole in the hull, then I'm going to glass it up and be done with it, and then I don't ever have to worry about it springing a leak. Here are some of those cracks from the flexing of the hull laminate. They are just in the gel coat. As I said, I've sounded it all with a little hammer. The laminate appears to be absolutely fine. It's not delaminated. I just need to probably grind out those cracks and then fill them with epoxy, and then they will be good, at least on the outside, and then put some more structure into the boat so that the problem doesn't reoccur. I've brought you up inside the boat now, and as you can see, for a performance oriented kind of racer cruiser, she's actually pretty comfortable. So twin aft cabins, nav station, there's lots of bits and bobs everywhere, new bits to be fitted. There's a separate heads with a shower, and up there is the forward cabin. So that, I think, is why this boat is probably one of the best performance cruisers from the kind of mid-90s to noughties era, and I was so excited to be able to get one in budget. But I could only get it in budget because it was cheap, because it has a few issues to deal with. So this is the area where I'm going to have to do some laminating. If you look down through that locker top there, you can see towards the top of the screen there is a fairly chunky stringer that's glassed in. You've then got a centre line, kind of longitudinal. There's a bulkhead back there, but right in the middle there's not a lot of support for that large area there. Now, to effect the repair down here, I am going to have to do some grinding to prepare the inside of the hull, the surface of the hull, so that I can laminate to it, and that always creates a lot of dust, so I need to clear out the sails and the upholstery that are up in this forward cabin and get them out. Looking through the locker now, you can see I've been busy with a marker pen and a tape measure, and that is the area that I'm going to be working on. So in the centre there, you've got a centre line, and then the cross-hatched area, that is where I'm going to be fitting the stringer itself. That's where it's going to be located. It's going to be 4 inches or 100 mil wide, and then either side of that there's 100 mil or 4 inches of area, both sides, that need to be ground back, because that's where the laminate is going to have to be attached. So it's going to come along the hull, over the top of the stringer, and back down the other side. Now, just to help explain what it is that I'm actually trying to do, I've drawn a picture, because they say it's worth 1,000 words. So here we have the hull of the boat. There is a bulkhead, and there is the stringer that was built into the boat when it was new. And we've got this big free area here, which is flexing when the boat is getting pounded. So what I'm going to be doing is grinding back that surface and then putting in my own little stringer like that. And this is very hard to draw at a funny angle like that, but of course just gluing that on isn't going to do very much at all. So I then need to lay up some glass which goes up over the top, down the other side, and attaches to the hull. So that is going to be about 100 mil, that's going to be about 100 mil, that's going to be about 100 mil. So we've got a decent amount of surface area for this to bond down to. So I will also taper these bits of glass that I put in so that they don't all abruptly end at one point. So I'll put a third bit in like that. I'm just doing this for illustrative purposes. I might put more than 3 layers in. Haven't made that decision yet, but the point is you don't want an abrupt end, because then that causes a hinging point potentially in the laminate, because all structures are going to flex, all boats flex a little bit, and it's about managing that flex. So what I'm going to do is taper these off so there isn't a hard edge or a point at which the laminate can hinge around. So that is the plan. I'm going to delay grinding just a tiny bit longer. So there's a coverall, that's essential equipment. If you're trying to grind and do a large surface area, you can use an angle grinder with a flap disc on it like this. 40 grit, 60 grit flap disc like that removes material very, very fast, but it sends it everywhere. So it creates an awful lot of mess, and if you're doing a big job, to be honest with you, it's worth making the mess and having the tidy up time just to get the job done quickly. However, if you're trying to minimise the mess, my favourite tool is the Makita 9031, which is this belt sander here. You can see it is covered in dust because I've been doing a load of grinding on a westerly, which is over there, and I'm just doing this as a fill-in job because I need to do some laminating outside, and it's kind of a bit grey outside, so I'm getting on with my own boat for an hour or two. But this thing is brilliant because you can get into tight corners, you can put a vacuum cleaner right up close to the end here, and as you're grinding, most of the dirt goes straight up the vacuum cleaner. So this is well worth a buy if you are going to be doing lots of glass fibre grinding work. I'll put a link in the description down there if I remember, to Amazon where you can buy one. Buy yourself lots of belts as well. 40, 60, 80 grit, something like that. If you're doing laminate removal, surface prep, you can obviously get finer grades than that if you're doing some sort of fine work. Right, I really can't put it off any longer now. I'm going to have to suit up. When you're grinding polyester, you really do need to protect yourself. The very, very bare minimum is a decent quality mask that fits around your face, which is problematic if you have a beard like me. You have to get your beard trimmed quite short, and some sort of safety goggles, but the dusks still get on your face and irritate you. So this is a Tyvek suit, so it goes over my head and leaves minimal skin on show. But I have fairly recently bought a better mask system, which is this thing made by Sealy. So this is a filtered air blower, which you strap to yourself. You put the battery in the bottom there, and then there is a full overhead mask here which I wear, and this, to be perfectly honest with you, has been a bit of a game changer. So this hooded mask goes over my face, it's got a hose on it, and using this really makes a really horrible job slightly less unpleasant. One of the nice things about having an air-fed mask is, one, it's filtered, but two, it stops this from steaming up. I've tried full face masks before over the years, and I've never found one that didn't mist up whilst I'm working, but this one, whilst quite expensive, is well worth a look if you're going to be doing lots of grinding. If you're doing a little bit, then maybe you can put up with the dust and just wear a face mask, but if you're doing a lot, well, you've only got one pair of lungs, and having itchy eyes and painful eyes because you've got dust in them is not fun. So this is well worth a buy. Well, that's the grinding done in the locker on both sides, so you can see what I've done there. What I'm now going to do is mark back on there the central position, and I need to go and get the material I'm going to be using for the kind of core of the stringer that I'm going to be putting in there, which is some structural foam. But before I go and cut that, I'm going to go and investigate the through holes for the log and the speed, which are around here under the floor in the shower room. So under here we have a little sump for the shower, which does also need a little bit of a repair because the edges have come away, if you can see that. And we have the depth and speed transducers. So I'm going to take both of those out now. They normally require a bit of persuasion, and then I think my plan is to glass up this aft one here, the one with the speed in, and then the depth one will become the depth and speed transducer. Well, that's the two transducers out, and I've got to be honest with you, one of those was alarmingly easy to remove. They've got little lock nuts on them if you've ever fitted them before, kind of ring lock nuts on the top. And I went to turn one of those, and it didn't want to unscrew, but the whole fitting just kind of rotated in its hole. I've cleaned up the outside with a scraper. Unfortunately, it's now raining outside, but I'm hoping that will stop soon because I want to go and get some lunch. But before lunch, unfortunately, I've got to do some more grinding. So if we go through to the heads now, you can see there are two fairly large holes in the bottom of the boat. That forward one I'm going to reuse with the new transducer, but that aft one I'm going to now have to grind a bevel on the inside of this, 12:1 bevel, so I can lay up some glass in there and seal up that hole from the inside. And then once that's done, I'll do a little bit of prep on the outside and lay up maybe a couple of layers of glass on the outside, fill them fair, and then I've got one less hole in the bottom of the boat. I'm well aware that I'm not showing you every single step of the process, but that's partly because I can't get the camera into some of these tight corners and do the job at the same time without elbows knocking over cameras or whatever. And you know, I do need to do the job as well as film it as best I can, so sorry about that. But if you are enjoying this episode, do remember to give me a thumbs up down below, a like down below. That does help me massively, as does hitting the subscribe button. Both those things cost you absolutely nothing, take less than a second, but make a big difference to me and the growth of this channel. Thank you very much if you have already done those two things. And there we go, that is the grinding around that hole done. So the hull is probably 8 to 10 mil thick there, and so I've ground a bevel back, which gives me sufficient surface area to bond glass to inside. And then what I normally do, just to be belt and braces, is just grind back a little bit on the outside and then just lay out some glass on the outside as well before filling and fairing. Well, lunch has been eaten and the foam has been cut. So this is the actual stuff that is going to get used, and it is a somewhat flexible foam for coring decks, or you can use it for making stringers. And I'll show you how flexible it is. It does bend to an extent, but if you go too far, obviously it then breaks. You can just break this quite easily if you just want to rough out something, but it's much easier to cut it just with a wood saw, and you can slice through it. In fact, this went through my table saw and it was like a knife through butter. This should hopefully go in here. I'm being gentle because I'm probably at the extreme end of the curvature that it will take. But because of the shape of the boat, it doesn't quite go in a straight line because it is flat and it has to lie against the hull. But that's going to go in quite nicely like that. So the plan is to glue these in. I'm actually going to glue them in with a thickened epoxy and then lay up the glass over the top. So this foam is fairly inexpensive, to be honest with you. It is, I'm trying to remember, I think it cost me £40 for a couple of sheets, and the sheets were over a metre by a bit under a metre. In terms of how strong it is, obviously it breaks quite easily if you do that because it's breaking on the joins that allow it to bend. But if I put all my weight on this, I'm literally going to put my hand on it and rock on it. Hardly, well, not an impression at all. That's completely solid. So I'm not sure what this stuff's made out of. I could probably look it up, but it is fairly tough foam. But obviously it's also sandable and cuttable, but it doesn't want to crush, that's for sure. Right, I need some acetone to wipe down in here, make it nice and clean. Gloves, epoxy. I'm probably going to use colloidal silica in the epoxy just to thicken it up a little bit, maybe a bit of that and a bit of low density filler just to glue it in place. And then once that's cured, we can lay up glass over the top. Remember, this stuff isn't really structural. This isn't what's giving the strength to what we're doing. It's the glass that goes over the top that's giving the strength. So because this will literally do that if I bend it. So hard to crush, easy to break. Well folks, I have mixed up a fairly, what I'd call loose, semi-runny batch of thickened epoxy. So this is just straight old laminating and general purpose epoxy with some colloidal silica in it. And I'm going to put a bit on the hull, but most of it I'm going to put on the foam and see if I can smush this first piece into position. I'm not entirely sure how much I'm going to need. You can see this is it'll sort of just about run off the spreader that I'm using. So I'm just going to just pop a bit in here. Let me put the camera down so you can see what I am doing. Because here at Refit and Sail, not only am I the presenter, I am also the cameraman, the sound man, the editor, and yeah, kind of everything else really. So I'm just going to sort of put a small amount on the surface here, straight down the middle, but I need a little bit more just to fill a bit of a gap there because there's like the edge of the laminate there, so that is probably enough on there. Turn this over and see if I can smush the rest of this into here. It's probably way more than I need, but some of it will go into these little gaps in the foam, I imagine. This would be much easier if I had more space, but I only have this kind of space I can work in and be on camera. It would be much easier if I did this in the main cabin where I can swing a cat or swing a piece of foam. There. That should do the trick. And if I'm lucky, this will just go in and stay without tape, but I suspect I might need a bit of masking tape on it, but of course I can't put the masking tape on until I've got all the layers of the foam on. But if I give this a good push in, that's actually, I think that's actually going to stay. That went very easily and very smoothly. I'm confident that these are not going to move. I've got a little bit of squeeze out in a few places, but just to make sure, I'm just going to put a bit of tape over the top, and that will happily stay there and cure, I think. I didn't really need to make it this big. I have probably slightly overdone it. I could have made it, 60 or 70 mil rather than 100 mil, but it doesn't matter. This stuff is so light in weight, it is not going to make any difference really to the weight of the boat, and I'd rather be on the cautious side and make it slightly bigger than slightly smaller. Now I've got to rinse and repeat for the other side, and if I'd thought about it I would have done the other side first, because I kind of need to stand in here to do that side. Well, I'm running short on time today because family duties call very, very soon, but I have, without recording it, just glassed up that hole for the second transducer. So that's all gone well. It's been done with combi mat, which Americans know quite often as 1708. So it's a biaxial glass with CSM sewn onto it. I also used a little bit of additional CSM in the hole as well. So it was laid up with a vinyl ester resin, so it's compatible with all those glass products, but also compatible with the glass and the resin that this boat was originally made out of, and is a very good option for strong fiberglass repairs. And here is that repair. So I filled the hole, the bevel that I made, the hole all the way up to the original kind of surface level. Once that has cured, I can come in, give it a little sand, and then finish that off with a colour matched gel coat, and then it will be virtually invisible. Now, you obviously can't lay glass up against thin air, so on the outside of the hull I just got 3 or 4 layers of duct tape, some strong fabric tape that is fairly waterproof, and stuck that on the outside. So it's duct tape reinforced glass fibre at the moment, but once this is cured I can rip the duct tape off, clean up any glue residue, and I'm going to grind back on the outside, possibly lay up 1 or 2 layers of glass, I quite often do, and then fill and fare the outside, and the repair will be done. Well folks, I have progressed with the repair up here. I have ground back the surface here, having finished off inside. Ground off the surface here just so that I could lay up a couple of layers of glass. So there's 2 layers of the combi mat in here. It has then had another sand all over. It's had a wipe with acetone, and all that's left to do now is to give it a little bit of filler over the top, a little skim, so that can then be filled and fed and it will be beautifully smooth. On the inside, I have finished it completely. Again, off camera, I had a bit of time, so I gave the repair a very light sand, and it has had a coat of fairly closely matched, colour matched gel coat on the inside, flow coat in fact. So, so that is all done on the inside. Just got to finish it off on the outside with a little smush of this stuff. I've mixed up far more than I need, but I can overfill this slightly, and then, as it is the end of the day, I'm going to pack up and come back tomorrow, give it a little sand and call it done. Now the whole of the bottom of this boat is going to get a fresh epoxy barrier coat, so this will get coated along with the rest of the hull when I do that. Although this is an epoxy filler, so it is pretty waterproof. There we go. I am going to call that done. It's now the next day, and this has all been glued into position. I've removed the tape that was probably not really doing anything to help. You may be able to see I have just been in here with some 60 grit sandpaper, and I've radiused over these corners here and here, same on the other side, because as hopefully you know by now if you've been watching my videos, glass does not like going around sharp corners, and so we're going to be laying up glass. Up there's going to be a radius in here, over that radius there, and back down the other side. Now the glass I'm going to be using, as before if you've watched the channel, is combi mat. It is a biaxial glass. A lot of people in America land call it 1708, I believe. I just call it combi mat because it's a combination of biaxial glass woven together with a chop strand mat also woven to that. This is CSM that isn't glued together with a binder, so it can be used with epoxy or polyester or vinyl ester. I'm going to be using vinyl ester to glue this in. The other thing I have done, which you may or may not be able to see, is I've tapered the end here. As you probably know, when you put multiple things together and bend them, they tend to overlap at the top, so I've just trimmed that back flush so that I can lay up glass against that and the hull. Here's an offcut of the combi mat. I've brought this in because I'm probably going to need to cut some small sections out just to do the ends, and as you can see it's biax on one side, so the glass runs in that direction and in that direction, and it's kind of sewn together. On the other side it's CSM, and the whole lot is stitched together, so you can use it with whatever resin you wish. Polyester, vinyl ester, which is what I'm using, or epoxy if you are used to using that. That is a good way to go as well. Well folks, it's the next day now and there is much better light in here. This is all done. Let me show you what it looks like. There is the stringer on the starboard side with the flow coat over it. I'm not going to say this is the most beautiful bit of laminating I've ever done. Strangely enough, it would be more beautiful if I did it with CSM because you can smush the fibres around a little bit. You don't have all these joins, but it is stronger to do it with a woven glass than it is with CSM, so that's why I have done it this way. Maximum strength, minimum weight. But on that subject, I've obviously also covered it in flow coat just to beautify it, and just here, you may or may not be able to see, the gel coat that I've put on has reacted with whatever this is, and I'm fairly confident now that this is paint rather than flow coat. So I suspect that was done as a weight saving measure when the boat was built. They decided to use paint because a very thin coating of paint is lighter than putting a moderately thick coating of flow coat, gel coat, or gel wash, or whatever you want to call it. So that looks a little bit unsightly, but I can live with that. It's in the bottom of a locker. So that is the internal structural repair all done. I now need to look at what's going on outside. If you recall, there are some cracks in the gel coat, which shouldn't get any worse now that we've put some extra strength into the boat, but I don't want to leave those cracks as they are. Everything's going to get covered with epoxy, but I think the best thing to do would be just to carefully grind out each of those cracks and then put a little smush of epoxy filler into those. They are only in the gel coat, they're not into the laminate, so I'm not worried structurally. I just think it's going to be better if I can get a nice flat surface without cracks in it there before I coat it all with an epoxy barrier. Here are those cracks which I'm talking about. They are very unsightly and numerous, which is quite annoying. It's going to take a little bit of grinding, I think, just to open all of them up. To grind these little cracks out, I'm going to be using my little Dremel, which isn't a Dremel, it's a Bosch, and it has in the end of it a little die grinder bit. So I buy packs of these like this off of Amazon, and they are absolutely fantastic. They are not particularly expensive. I think it's 10 or 12 pounds, so I don't know what that is in dollars, $15. And they are so useful, and they are the best thing you can buy for your Dremel. Super quick material removal. In fact, you need to be very careful when using them on GRP, but if you're doing a little job on an aluminium mast, for example, you need to open up a slot. These are fantastic and quick to use. Well, I've ground out both sides. All these cracks have been opened up. Some were bigger cracks, so I opened up a little bit deeper. Most of them were very, very shallow, so I just went into the gel a little way, just trying to keep above the laminate. But as I said, there's the odd one. These two up here were particularly deep, so I thought I'd go a bit deeper. This just needs now a wipe down with acetone, and then when I mix up some epoxy filler, which I've got to do for a paid job over there, I'm going to smush a bit into all of these cracks. That can cure a sand, and then the job's done. Well folks, it's the next day. It is getting dark. I have a spotlight down there, so I'm sorry about the quality of this video, but before it gets completely dark, I want to sand this back. I want to have a little sand around the hole here because I want to fit the transducer so that if I need to do some filling there, I can put a bit of filling and fairing compound around the new transducer to make it super smooth. And I also want to sand this filler here, which is over the top of the new laminate I put over the repair for one of the old holes for the, I can't remember if that was speed and that was depth or the other way around, but anyway, I only need one hole, I don't need two. There's a joke there probably. I filled in the back hole and I've kept the front hole. Anyway, time to do sanding. I don't think I need to do any more filling on this. I can very, very slightly feel ridges on the surface where the filler may have shrunk slightly, but I'm not going to fill it again because this is all going to get coated with an epoxy barrier coat, and it's a high build epoxy barrier coat, and that will fill in all these very slight ridges. So I'm just creating work if I fill that again, so I'm going to leave it. But what I am going to do is fit the transducer housing in the front hull. So this is the transducer housing. It does have an arrow on it to say which way round it is supposed to go. I'm not sure why it has an arrow. I think that's a hangover from the days when there used to be a little notch in the front for the transducer to locate in. I've had a look at it. It can go whatever way you like, to be honest with you, but because there is an arrow, I will follow the arrow. That has been wiped with acetone, which is why I'm not touching it. It is a slightly loose fit in this hole. I don't know if the back hole was a little smaller, but I'm using the front hole. So I'm going to stick some goo on that. I've just got my sealant gun out, so I'm going to give this a nice generous dollop of sealant. I like to get it, don't know if you can see that, I like to get it on the threads so it goes up inside the hole slightly. And then I want a decent amount of squeeze out as well, because that proves I've got a decent seal on this. So I'm using Sabatac 750 XL, which is my preferred sealant, just because it's easy to clean up. Slightly easier than some of the other alternatives out there, but they all do a decent enough job for this sort of thing. What I don't use is silicone. That is not something that I use on any job on a boat, unless I absolutely know it's something that I need to remove. Now, the surface tension of the sealant should hopefully hold it in the hole whilst I do the nut up on the inside. There's a rubber washer which goes against the inside of the hull, and there's a lock nut that does up, and then I'm just going to leave it, apart from maybe cleaning up the squeeze out. Right, that can go up there. There's the arrow, so I'm going to have that pointing forward. It's quite easy to line the arrow up with the centre line in the moulding of the boat. So pull that up. That is fairly tight. Right, I'm going to switch you off and pop up and do up the lock nut. That's it done up on the inside, so I'm just going to wipe off the excess goop. And then what I may do, haven't completely decided, but I'm very tempted to put some fairing compound around this just to fair in the transducer housing, because racing boat, and I just like things to be as smooth and as slippery as possible. You can spend an awful lot of money on sails and equipment and things like that, but if you don't have as flat and as smooth a bottom as possible, and that doesn't cost anything other than a bit of time and effort, well, you're kind of throwing money away. And with that, I'm going to call this done and that done. So that's the end of the video, folks. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Do give me a thumbs up and a like down below. If you want to support the show, there is a link down in the description, a PayPal link, where you can buy me a beer. It helps support this channel, it helps support this boat, and sometimes it just gets spent on beer, which is always good. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.